So I'm Michael Sanchez with Prison Professors, and I received an email from the other day, and it just basically says I was released from federal prison to home confinement after serving 8 years and 9 months of a 17-year sentence. And he wanted to ask me some questions, and so I just invited him. I said, I think a lot of people have those same kinds of questions, and I want to take the time to respond to them. But because of his situation that he's on home confinement, I'm blurring his face so that you can't see him because we don't know really. I don't want to do anything that would cause him any trouble. And for the purposes of this interview, we're going to call him any name that he would like. Pick a name.
Let's go with Bob.
Let's go with Bob. So here's the title, What About Bob? So Bob, why don't you tell us a little bit about, first of all, how you found me and what you know about me and our channel, and then I'll fill you in on it. But we'll start with the premise that there is nothing you cannot ask me. And I have a lot of experience. I was incarcerated for 26 years and been home, so I know every aspect of this. And I'm very happy to share with you that strategy. But how did we connect?
Great. Well, I have recently been released, as you said, and am on home confinement due to the COVID-19 pandemic. And I'm one of the, I guess, fortunate ones that got released based on that. In this process, I'm trying to get quote unquote gainfully employed. And in this process of doing it, I've been told that I can't really do much other than get a job. My background is I've always been self-employed. I've been in the financial services business for close to 30 years. And so I have a very large amount of restitution that I'm supposed to pay, but they want me to go get a job that pays, $15 an hour. And so what I'm exploring is I was told I could not be self-employed or work for a family member. And of course, that's where my expertise is and my experience. And I am trying to understand what the actual rules are, because a friend of mine who also got released, he is in a different district and a different halfway house, and they allow him to be self-employed and allow him to work for a family member. And so in asking them, they didn't really have a good answer other than I could write a cop-out. And so I was exploring online the rules related to self-employment and working for family while on home confinement. And I, quite frankly, I've spent hours and hours and hours sifting through it all, and there's just no answers, including the BOP website and policy statements do not address this issue. And so I ran across your name. By doing the search, I looked at it, and I've actually seen your some advertisements somewhere before. It seems like I was actually in prison seeing somehow I ran across it because it was familiar. And so that, because I was familiar with it and you guys had experience with having been incarcerated, I thought I'd reach out to you and see if you had some answers.
Well, I'm glad to share with you what my experience is and what I know. And again, as I said, there's nothing you can't ask me, but let's get there kind of organically. You said that you just were released from prison, and I want to congratulate you on being able to do this transition. And I'm going to have to ask you some questions that's going to bear on how I respond. So what did you go to prison for, and what was the length of sentence that you had?
Okay, so I was convicted. I went to trial, and I was convicted of securities fraud, wire fraud, and of course they add wire fraud and money laundering to anything that you do. And specifically what I was accused of is I had a private equity firm, and I was accused of taking money from investments and using them in other investments. And so everything stemmed around that. And then I was convicted and sentenced to 17 years in prison.
And that's likely because of the amount of loss?
That's correct. Yeah. And I actually had my my sentencing guidelines. I was actually, they put me at a level 55, which, as you know, is the maximum is 43. Yeah. So it was, they were seeking a life sentence, and that's a whole nother story.
But be clear, you had no criminal background, and it was just a significant amount of loss, and that's what exposed you to a much longer sentence. Is that right?
That's right. And right. All I've ever had is parking tickets and a couple speeding tickets in my life.
So when you look back at that, could you tell us if you ever had an opportunity to accept a plea agreement that would have limited or minimized your exposure to imprisonment?
So before the Securities and Exchange Commission was the first group that came in, appointed a receiver, took over the company and my personal assets. And then when that happened, it took about a year and a half before I actually got indicted of anything.
When the civil investigation, the government investigation began, did you have any concerns that this could turn into DOJ, or were you thinking it was going to be a civil matter?
I quite frankly have never had any experience with, except for civil litigation with business deals. I've never had any experience with the DOJ and the federal prosecutors and U.S. attorney. And so I was pretty unaware and naive about the whole thing, and the possible consequences, because I felt, based off what they had told me, that I could prove I was innocent and that I had nothing to worry about, and didn't understand how the system worked at all. So they actually came to me prior to any indictment and in a proffer meeting and said, they want, if I would commit to pleading guilty, that they would offer a year to year and a half sentence. And I, of course, at the time said I haven't done anything wrong, and no. And so that then later they offered again 5 years, and prior to indictment, and again they couldn't tell me why I was being prosecuted. So I said no, I'll take it to trial. And then by that time, by the time they indicted me, they rushed me to trial. I had about 4 weeks to prepare for trial once we had indictment, and so there weren't any other offers past that. So no official offers. It was just talk. Well,
very important data point, though, because it sounds like had you known a little bit more about how the system operates, you may have been able to take the risk-reward calculation into mind when you were going through those government investigations that ultimately resulted in a 17-year sentence. What was the amount of costs that it took you to get the 17 years? How much did you spend in legal fees?
Well, so my case is probably much like a lot of white-collar crimes that they prosecute, which is that by coming in and appointing the receiver, they froze all my assets, took all my personal net worth away from me, froze everything, took over my company, and started selling assets before I was convicted of anything. And so I was not allowed to liquidate any of those funds for myself. They were busy liquidating them and getting them back to investors. So the answer is I didn't spend that much. I spent probably about close to 200,000, but I didn't have the opportunity to mount a legal defense where I could hire an attorney that could represent me. They ended up appointing a court-appointed attorney.
Well, it's really important that you just, even spending $200,000 is a significant sum of money, particularly when you didn't get the type of advice that may have been helpful to you. And, one of the things that I've experienced is that, when you get targeted by the federal government, it's really important to understand risks and rewards. And you're effectively kind of going through this right now, where you're still navigating and charting unfamiliar waters, and you don't really know which direction to swim in. So somebody who's, operates under the assumption that they were a law-abiding citizen and yet finds themselves targeted of a government investigation. As soon as you get that type of information, a lot of times it's prudent to be looking at what's the downside. What can I do to mitigate these risks? As a year and a day effectively means I can recalibrate, get my life back together. You probably could have preserved some assets and had been much farther along had they known your story, Bob's story, much earlier. But now that has helped me. Where did they put you? Where did you serve your sentence?
In Bastrop, Texas.
Okay, so you did the entire time in the Bastrop prison. Was that the medium then, or the low?
No, they have just a low and a camp there. I was in the camp, the low for 6.5 years, and then the rest of the time in at the camp.
And so there came a time, of course, we're filming this in the end of June 2020, when we're in the era of the pandemic. Everybody's familiar, I think, that on our channel anyway, with the Attorney General's memorandum that authorized the Bureau of Prisons to begin releasing people that qualified for the pandemic. Can you walk us through the procedures that you took to become a candidate for that relief?
Well, I didn't do anything other than I was serving my sentence, and one day they all of a sudden started calling people into the counselor's office, and I was one of those 30 people they called, and I was surprised. So one day you think you've got 6 or 7 more years to go in prison, and the next day they just call you out of the blue, come see us, and we think that you're a candidate for home confinement? Exactly. And it wasn't, they think it was, we walked in and he said, okay, he put a piece of paper in front of me and he said, fill this out. And it had, who I was going to release to, how they were going to pick me up. I mean, it was very simple. And I said, you do realize I've got like almost 6 years left? And he said, yeah, well, you've been blessed. And you got over 50% of your time done. And you don't have any violence in your background, and you don't have any incident reports, and so you're going home.
What an amazing blessing!
Oh man, it was unbelievable.
And how old are you, Bob?
52.
So you're still a young man, very young man, because I'm 56. So if you're 52, you're very young.
That's right.
And do you have any underlying health conditions like asthma or diabetes or any? You look like you're in pretty good shape. Any underlying health conditions?
No, none at all. None at all.
Very powerful information, and certainly a measure of hope for anybody who's going in there. The criteria, it sounds like from Bob, was number one, when he went in, he was deliberate about keeping a clean disciplinary record. And although he didn't know all of the reasons that would help him, later when this opportunity opened, he was a great candidate, and then enough calendar pages to have turned. But now he's in this really unfamiliar situation with saying, well, how do I deal with this? So how many more years do you have until, unless something else changes, that you expire your BOP sentence?
So I've got right about 5.5 years.
Okay. And could you walk us through how long it's been since you were released and what you've had to do since you got released?
So I was released the last week of May. And so it's been, 5-6 weeks. And the difficult thing has been, well, first of all, there's nothing difficult or problematic about it. I mean, it's great being home no matter what. I mean, so all this other stuff is just things that have to be worked through. But regardless, I'm just grateful to be here. And if I have to sit here and do nothing, I'm happier being here than where I was. But the things that I have to navigate are just getting back into life.
But when
you know,
when you got released, walk us through that. Because did you have to report to a halfway house and meet a case manager? Did you meet a probation officer, or did you just go home and not meet anybody?
so what I did was they released me. I was in quarantine for about 3 weeks, and then they released me from there and drove me to the airport, dropped me off at the airport, and then I was picked up in Denver, and then my parents drove me to the halfway house, and I reported in there. And at that point, I filled out all their paperwork that they had, and they put on an ankle monitor. And then the next day, I had to go back in again and go through some more, orientation type stuff. But
So you slept at home that night. You never slept at the halfway house.
Yep, that's right.
Do you have any financial penalties where you have to pay the halfway house any percentage of your income or anything along those lines?
No.
So you were released home, and did you meet a case manager that gave you any type of guidance on what they expected from you?
I met with the case manager. Like I said, when the first day, it was pretty quick. I kind of got in and out, signed some paperwork and put an ankle monitor on, and then came back the next day where I got more detail. But, it's typical, BOP where they don't really tell you much. You're kind of left on your own to figure it out. Not that they were doing anything mean or bad. They just didn't tell you much. It was just, go home and we'll talk to you and kind of work through it.
Do you have any guidance on regarding reporting mechanisms or what you have to report to with the halfway house? Can you hear me? Uh-oh, it looks like we got frozen.
No, go say that again. What again?
We got frozen. My question was, do you have any reporting mechanisms to the case manager at the halfway house? Do you have to call and check in daily? Do you have any restrictions like that?
Yeah, so what I have is I've got to call in anytime I leave the house, of course, and anytime I return. And then I also have to call between 6 a.m. and 9 a.m. To see if I have a UA that day. And then they also call randomly during the day and night. It's usually about 10:30 to 11 at night, and then 4 in the morning. So that's good. But they just check periodically to make sure I'm home. They literally call and say, "Are you home?" And I tell them I am, and then that's it.
And you have
I also have regular weekly meetings with the case manager or his assistant to go over any questions I have, needs, or anything. And they've been pretty good at being responsive on trying to help on that.
And you have the ability to go and find employment. Is that correct?
So, kinda. With this COVID thing, it's limited on what you can do. But they are allowing, in my area, they're allowing us to seek employment. And you can get pre-approved interview passes and things like that. But they have to be pre-approved.
Okay, so your question for me, so thank you for giving us that background. That's very helpful to me. To provide clarity, I was incarcerated for 25 years. I served the time in every security level. And after my 25th year, I went to a halfway house to serve my final year. And in that halfway house, I did 6 months in the halfway house, sleeping there, and then 6 months on home confinement. So it was a little bit different for me than for you, because I was, number one, incarcerated for a really long time, and number two, I was at the end of my sentence, whereas you're not at the end of your sentence, and you're in a very unusual situation with regard to a pandemic. So I think that you are in this situation where the best thing to do is to get that clarity. Do you have any indication that you're going to be able to complete the rest of your time on home confinement, barring you don't do anything wrong?
That is the indication that I have, that I'll be able to do that.
Okay. So, and you want to, so with regard to your question about self-employment, I was not in the BOP. I was in the, you transition from the executive branch of government, which is the BOP, to the judicial branch of government, which is probation when you finish your sentence. When I was in the halfway house, of course, I was in the same situation as you. The only difference was I was like at the tail end of my sentence. So I was able to be self-employed, but it was because I created a rather extensive record while I was in prison of the work that I did. So I wrote a lot of books that were related to criminal justice reform, and I had opportunities to work with universities, and I could present that message, and they allowed me to do it. So my recommendation to you is you do the same thing. You write out a plan and then find a way that you can get an income stream from that plan, present it to a case manager, and I suspect they're going to approve it, and they're going to ask you for financial records, like when you get paid and things of that sort. So I think that if you can create that plan and get them to sign off on it, you're protected. Is that something that strikes you as is doable in your jurisdiction?
Yeah, I do. And kind of where I left it with them is I this last week pressed it with them on my weekly meeting, and I asked them specifically, is there a process for me to appeal this? And so they said, yes, you can. There's someone in the that they report to with the BOP that I can, appeal the process to. And so that's exactly what I was doing. I just didn't, in that process of writing that up and putting it together, I didn't know if there was some documentation or published rules that I could go by, and that I could rely on to build my case for doing this, because I want to do everything right. I want to do it to where I'm upfront and, like you said, have it approved, rather than try to go around the system or anything, because I don't want to do anything to risk my situation. Like I said, it's so great being home that I don't want to do anything to risk that.
So that's certainly the right mindset and the things that you have to do. But with regard to looking for documentation, here's what you've got to know. You've been authorized, or the Attorney General authorized the BOP to let people out to go to home confinement. On home confinement, it's a discretionary matter, and that's why you're going to see, 50. We've got 90 some different jurisdictions in the United States. You're probably going to have 90 different interpretations of that rule of what you can and can't do. But it doesn't really matter with regard to what's on paper. What matters is going to be your ability to make a persuasive case in advocating for yourself, because there will always be exceptions. I was an exception, and you can be an exception if you build a more powerful enough case. You've built businesses before, and you know the importance of sales. You're about ready to make a very big sale. This is what I want to do with my life. Here's why it makes sense. Here's how it can benefit the community and serve the interests of my judgment and commitment order. But they're not going to have a guideline. They may say, just out of being the system as the system, they may have a default response, which is no. But you are going to be able to appeal, and you are going to be able to build a case. But I do think you always have to move forward with this idea that says, hey, I'm here right now. I'm not standing up for count, and I'm not in prison. Yeah. And if they say no, I'll get the job for 3 years, because it's a lot better than working at Unicor, or you're working at the food service department, or wherever you're working at Bastrop.
Absolutely. Yep.
What type of business would you like to create as a self-employed person?
Well, what I'm wanting to create is, I've got two passions in my life. One is my family, and second is motorcycles. And so I've decided I want to stay out of any business that's got high regulation situation like I've had in the past. And so I'm going to build a internet-based motorcycle business that and while I was in prison, I put together a business plan for it. And so I've got all that done. I know exactly what I need and financial statements and everything that you need to do that. So I have that to offer to them.
Is that a retail establishment where you'd sell motorcycles or what?
No, it's what I'm wanting to do is build basically a hub that you can go to for every motorcycle need you have online and bring everything to you in one spot, including education, do-it-yourself projects, maintenance schedules, information, education, and be able to buy parts and have swap meet and social media component where people can communicate. All these things exist out there by themselves, but there's so much information, it's information overload, that I want to bring it in to have one place you go that's reliable and you can count on and trust to give you good, accurate information to its members, and then provide all the parts and everything for, wholesale rather than putting a retail price on it.
So how will you monetize that, as a broker or subscriptions or what, or e-commerce?
Neither. So what I'm going to do is, at the end of the day, how you make money is by selling product. But instead of putting a margin in there for profit, what we're going to do is just have a transaction fee associated with them. So a minimal transaction fee, and try to get volume to come in, people using it as a trusted source to buy oil that has a do-it-yourself project, and everything from being able to finance your motorcycle to get insurance, to you name it, and just get a small transaction fee on everything that's done, and then offer the whole service for free.
So do you have experience in building tech companies like that?
I do. I've got, so my private equity company, what we did was we purchased, mostly what we did was buy companies and turn them around and then sell them for a profit, hopefully. And so we had several technology companies that we dealt with and put together. And I've got a guy that wants to partner with me who that's all he's done, his professional career, and he's about my same age.
How would you get your leads?
So you mean to drive people to the site and all that?
Yeah. How would people find the website?
So there's two things. Initially on my business plan, one of the most important thing is the events that exist. There's over 20,000 Harley type motorcycle events annually in the United States. And anything from Sturgis to Daytona, you name it. And there you have, 500,000 people gathered together at a time. That is a great place to go. That's where the customer is there. And so one of the things we were going to do is to go in and be at those events, have booths, and work with the event organizers to load the app on their phone and get that to them. So I also have one of the things that I have done in my past. One of my things that we dealt with was professional athletes. So I had a large network of, particularly the NFL, where we represented them. I had a sports management company that we owned, and we used them to market and bring people in. I still have all those connections, and people are eager to get involved. Several celebrities and professional athletes. So I'm going to utilize their social networks that they have, use them as influencers to get out to these motorcycle enthusiasts and bring them in. So those are the big things.
And how will you get paid while you're building this business? Because this business is an idea right now. And this is something that I'm asking you these questions because I'm trying to figure out, how are you going to put this into a paperwork that a bureaucrat who doesn't understand these types of things to grasp? You're an entrepreneur. It's very clear. and you know how to sow a seed and say, okay, I won't get paid. I won't get my first dollar for 15 months, and that's acceptable. You'll work really hard for 15 months. But a bureaucrat doesn't always understand that. So how will you be getting paid in the interim before you turn into a revenue generating stage?
So I've got to where, based off the promotions that we're going to do, I've got some initial ways to generate income off selling product. It should, within the first 3 months, I should be able to generate revenue while we're building the different modules. So it's not going to, there's phases that it's going to launch. And the first ones are going to be able to generate revenue without a lot of expense. So that's how I'm going to initially generate it. And it won't be a lot. It'll build over time. The second option, which I'm trying to avoid, but I've got people who've dealt with me in the past who want to invest in the company and put money up to be part of it. I don't really want to do that because I just don't want that. Although I have no restrictions whatsoever from the court or anything, I can get right back to what I was doing. I've got kind of a sour taste in my mouth on that and want to stay away from it if I possibly can. So my plan really is, I can do that, but I would rather fund it off cash flow, and it'll take a good 2 to 3 months before I can get income coming in.
So there's a great philosopher. His name is Mick Jagger. You may have heard of him, and he came up with a great line that said, "You can't always get what you want, but if you try sometimes, you just might find you get what you need."
Right.
And from that wisdom, we might say, yeah, I would try and do it the way that you want to do it. Write up the proposal, see if the case manager or whoever it is that has that authority over you will grant you permission to work from home, build your model, and create it. But that could mean 3 months without an income. And as long as he's cool with that, probably will be, given the unusual circumstances of COVID, pursue that path. But if he says no, then you got to do what you can. And I would then have somebody else form an LLC, maybe give yourself a 5-year option that you could buy equity after 5 years, and just take a salary, and he'll put you on it so he can fund it and then pay you a salary. But that way you would be able to get permission and still be able to pursue there's a lot of ways to skin a cat. And yeah, that's just one way that you've got to be thinking about it. What would be really great is if you give this a shot and let us know what happened. Give me a text when you find out. And I'd love to do a follow-up with you, because I think a lot of people would like to learn about your experience and how you were able to overcome this little challenge that you've got right now. And that's figuring out, well, how am I going to recalibrate and launch the next phase of my career?
Yeah. And, one other just quick question, it relates to this, is how have you had any experience with restitution payments? And specifically, I have a pretty large restitution amount that I've got to pay back. And although I feel I don't owe it, I do owe it. And the fact is, I'm going to live up to that obligation. As long as the court says I have to pay it, that's what I'm going to do. The question is, what I worry about is building a company. So let's talk past this home confinement thing. Starting to build a company, and they come in and don't give it a chance to develop. And if I want to put all the money back into the company to grow the intrinsic value of it, how do I make sure that they don't come in like they've done to me in the past and, kind of rape and pillage, and then it never gets to be what it needs to be because they suck all the assets out of it before it gets a chance to go. Are they reasonable that way? Because again, my experience hadn't been so good.
Yeah, I think that every individual case is different. And I think that it's wise to be thinking about this. The good news for you is that right now you're still in the BOP, and the BOP has some policies, and they're not going to be, it's not going to be the same way as it will be when you're on what's called supervised release. So,
right.
So when you're on the BOP, my guess is that you're going to have a pretty reasonable FRP payment, which you're familiar with from when you were inside the financial responsibility plan. And it might be, $100 a month, might be $50 a month, might be a couple $100 a month, but it's not going to be burdensome that it would jeopardize your company. When you transition to supervised release, of course, you're going to get to make this case to a probation officer. And the probation officer will likely put together some type of a plan for you that if you don't like, you can go to a judge and have the judge, because then you're switched from executive branch to the judicial branch, and the judge will have discretion. So I've known judges that have taken things like people's tax returns, and they've wanted that money because it was, unfound windfall money that they could take. And I've known some that have put you on a financial plan of $100 a month, and as long as you pay that, you're cool. And that could last for the rest of your life. As you may know, that the government has 20 years to collect on a debt. In the event of its incarceration, suppose that 20 years doesn't start to toll until after you get out of prison. So you won't get out of prison in the system's eyes until you finish the sentence. That's when the 20 years will start. So it will be hanging over your head, but I've known number of people that have built successful businesses after prison, despite having, very high restitution orders, and they just pay the fee of whatever it is you can afford to pay. And I think you'll be okay on that regard.
Okay, good.
So
Great.
why don't you keep my number, and I'd love to hear what challenges you have and feature you back on the program. We'll just call you Bob, and you might subscribe to the YouTube channel, Prison Professors, because I publish new content every day, always with hopes of helping people understand a little bit more about how the system operates and what they can do to recalibrate and build a life of success and meaning and relevance even after they move beyond the challenges that you were experiencing a couple months ago.
Great. Well, hey, I really appreciate you taking the time, and it's good information. So I appreciate it, and I'll definitely stay in touch.
Awesome. So back with another video tomorrow. Thanks so much. And please subscribe if you haven't done so. And love it if you support our sponsors at cbdtv.com. Thank you.